17 years before Martin Luther King was assassinated, 12 years before Medgar Evers was shot in his own driveway, 3 years before Brown versus Board of Education made history, before the Civil Rights Movement even had an official name. There was a man in Florida who registered 116,000 black voters in the Jim Crow South. His name was Harry Moore. You have probably never heard of him. And that is exactly the problem. His story deserves to be told. This is that story. This is the story of America's first civil rights martyr, a man who fought for voting rights and paid with his life on Christmas. To understand Harry Moore, you first need to understand Florida in the early 1900s. It was not what you might think. Most people think of beaches and orange groves when they hear Florida. But Florida had a much darker and more violent reality. Between 1900 and 1930, Florida had the highest lynching rate per capita of any state in the entire country. Higher than Mississippi, higher than Alabama, higher than Georgia. 1 out of every 1,250 black residents was lynched. The Ku Klux Klan did not hide in Florida. They marched openly through black neighborhoods on Election Day wearing their white robes. In 1920, a white mob attacked the black community of Ocoee. Up to 60 people were killed just for trying to vote. 3 years later, in 1923, the entire black town of Rosewood was burned to the ground by a white mob in January. This was the Florida where Harry Tyson Moore grew up. And this was the Florida where he decided that something had to change. Harry Tyson Moore was born on November 18, 1905, in Houston, Florida, a tiny farming town in the rural north. His father, Johnny, worked for the railroad and ran a small store on the side. His mother, Rosa, did what she could to make ends meet. When Harry was just 9 years old, his father died suddenly. Rosa could not support him alone with her limited income and resources. So young Harry was sent to live with his 3 aunts in Jacksonville, a city that had a thriving black middle class at the time. His aunts were all educated women. 2 were teachers. 1 was a nurse. They taught young Harry to value learning above everything else. Harry was a straight-A student his entire life. His classmates nicknamed him Doc because he was always reading and always studying. At 19 years old, he graduated from Florida Memorial College with a teaching degree. He was ready to go change the world now. In 1925, Harry Moore walked into a one-room schoolhouse in Cocoa, Florida. He was only 20 years old at the time. He was supposed to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. He did all of that. But he also taught his students something else too. He brought sample ballots into his classroom. He taught his students how voting worked. He explained to them why it truly mattered. Moore believed that voting was a fundamental privilege of citizenship. He said that without it, there could be no true democracy at all. In Cocoa, he met a woman named Harriette Sims. She was 3 years older than him, a former teacher who now sold insurance policies. They fell in love and married on Christmas Day, 1926. That date would echo through the rest of their tragic story. Harry became principal of Titusville Colored School. Harriette went back to teaching 6th grade at another school in the same county. She was not just teaching from the approved textbooks, though. She taught Black history from hidden books by Du Bois and Langston Hughes. They had 2 daughters together. Peaches was born in 1928. Evangeline came in 1930. A beautiful family now. But Moore was not satisfied with just teaching children inside a classroom. He saw the injustice around him every single day of his life. Black teachers in Florida earned half what white teachers made for the exact same work. Same degrees, same hours. Half the pay always. In 1934, Harry Moore founded the Brevard County chapter of the NAACP. It was an incredibly dangerous thing to do then. 3 years later, in 1937, He did something no one in the Deep South had ever even attempted to do before that. He filed a lawsuit to equalize black and white teacher salaries. It was the first lawsuit of its kind anywhere in the entire region. He worked with a young NAACP attorney named Thurgood Marshall on the case. Yes, that Thurgood Marshall, the future Supreme Court Justice. The Florida Supreme Court dismissed the case on technical grounds, but it sent a powerful message across the entire American South. Similar lawsuits followed in other southern states after that. Slowly but surely, black teacher salaries began to rise across the region. In 1941, Moore organized the entire Florida State Conference of the NAACP. 10,000 members joined across 60 branches. But Moore's real focus was on something even more dangerous than filing lawsuits against the state. He wanted black people to vote now. In Jim Crow, Florida, where voting could get you killed by a mob, where registering meant putting your family in danger, he did it anyway. In 1944, the Supreme Court ruled that all-white Democratic primaries were unconstitutional. Moore saw his great opportunity. He founded the Progressive Voters League of Florida with one single mission: to register as many black voters as humanly possible now. His campaign slogan was simple and direct: a voteless citizen is a voiceless citizen. He repeated it everywhere he went across Florida. He drove thousands of miles across Florida's back roads in his old car, to churches, to orange groves, anywhere black people gathered. He taught people how to register to vote. He explained all the candidates. He organized carpools to get people to the polling places. When he started his campaign, only 4% of eligible black Floridians were registered to vote. That was almost nothing at all. By 1945, it was 14%, still low. But Moore was just getting started. He was not going to stop now at all. By 1950, 31% of eligible black voters in Florida were registered, an incredible achievement in the Jim Crow era. 116,000 new black voters registered. That was 51% higher than any other southern state at that time. Moore was building a real political machine in Florida, and the powerful white people in the state were starting to take notice of him. In 1946, the state retaliated against the Moores. Harry and Harriette were both fired from their teaching jobs immediately. The NAACP hired him as their first full-time paid executive director in Florida. Now he had nothing left to lose. Now he was dangerous. Starting in 1943, Moore took on an even more dangerous mission than voter registration. He started investigating lynchings. Every single lynching that happened anywhere in Florida. He drove to crime scenes himself. He took statements from the grieving families. Then he wrote letters demanding justice to the governor, to congressmen, to the president of the United States himself, naming names. He demanded that the killers be arrested and prosecuted. He named the suspects publicly. He absolutely refused to ever be silent about it. Author Ben Green later wrote about Moore. Teacher salaries will get you fired from your job. Investigating lynchings will get you killed. But determining the outcome of the governor's race through voter registration, that will get you assassinated. Moore knew all the risks. July 16th, 1949, Lake County, Florida. A 17-year-old white woman named Norma Paget made a terrible accusation. She claimed that 4 young black men had kidnapped and raped her. Their names were Samuel Shepard, Walter Irvin, Charles Greenlee, Ernest Thomas. What happened next would become known as Florida's Little Scottsboro, a case that would define the state's violent history of injustice. Ernest Thomas fled before he could be arrested. A sheriff's posse tracked him to a swamp near Live Oak. They found him sleeping there. They shot him while he was sleeping, 400 times. He was only 27 years old. The sheriff called it a justified shooting. The other 3 young men were arrested by the police. They were beaten savagely. They were tortured until they finally confessed to it. An all-white jury convicted them in a sham trial. Shepard and Irvin got the death penalty. Greenlee, just 16 years old, got life. Harry Moore threw everything he had into fighting the Groveland case. He worked with Thurgood Marshall and the entire NAACP legal team. In April 1951, they won a major victory. The Supreme Court overturned the convictions. A new trial was ordered immediately. Shepard and Irvin would be transported back to Lake County for their retrial. They would be in the custody of Sheriff Willis McCall. McCall was a brutal and notorious segregationist. 6'1", 240 pounds. He always wore a white Stetson cowboy hat. On November 6, 1951, McCall picked up the two handcuffed prisoners from the state prison to drive them back himself. He claimed the two handcuffed prisoners somehow attacked him during the drive, so he shot them both. He said it was pure self-defense. Samuel Shepard died on the spot from his gunshot wounds. Walter Irvin survived by playing dead in a ditch until help finally arrived. From his hospital bed, Walter Irvin told a completely different story. McCall pulled over, dragged them out, shot them both in cold blood. Harry Moore was absolutely furious when he heard what happened. He demanded that McCall be suspended immediately. He demanded an indictment. No charges were ever filed against Sheriff Willis McCall. He remained the sheriff of Lake County for another 20 years after that. The fall of 1951 was a season of absolute terror across the entire state of Florida. Bombs exploded almost every week now. In Miami, bombs hit Carver Village repeatedly. It was a housing project that dared to lease apartments to black families in white areas. Synagogues were bombed across the state. A Catholic church was attacked. The newspapers started calling it the Florida Terror of 51. 40 black homes were bombed across Florida in 1951 and 52 alone. It was organized domestic terrorism against blacks. And Harry Moore had just publicly called for the most feared sheriff in Florida to be indicted for cold-blooded murder. He was marked now. The NAACP national leadership in New York was worried about Moore. They thought he had become too aggressive, too political, too exposed. In November, just a few weeks before Christmas, they removed him from his paid position as executive director. Moore lost his only income. But he kept working anyway, completely unpaid now. He kept fighting for justice. Now he was completely unprotected by any organization at all. December 25th, 1951, Christmas Day. It was also Harry and Harriette Moore's 25th wedding anniversary together. Their daughter, Evangeline, was on a train coming home from Washington, D.C. She was studying there. They were all waiting to open presents. Harry's elderly mother, Rosa, was asleep in her small room at the back of the house. Their older daughter, Peaches, was staying somewhere else. It had been a quiet and peaceful Christmas Day. 25 years of marriage, 25 years of partnership, 25 years of love. Around 10 o'clock that night, Harry and Harriette went to bed together. Their bedroom was at the front of their small wooden house now. At exactly 10:20 p.m. on Christmas night, an enormous explosion ripped through their quiet house and shattered the peaceful silence. Someone had placed a bomb made of dynamite directly underneath their bedroom floor. It had been carefully planted there to kill them both. The blast was so powerful that neighbors heard the explosion from miles away. Voting rights pamphlets floated out of the burning wreckage. Rosa survived the explosion. The back of the house was mostly intact, but Harry and Harriette were both critically wounded in the front. The nearest hospital that would treat black patients was in Sanford, Florida. It was 30 miles away from their home in Mims, Florida. Let that sink in for a moment. The nearest hospital that would treat them as black patients was 30 miles away. In 1951, Harry Moore died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. he never made it there alive. He was just 46 years old when he died. Harriette somehow held on for 9 more days. She saw her husband buried on January 2nd. 3,500 people came to mourn. 9 days after the Christmas bombing, on January 3rd, 1952, Harriette Moore finally died from her devastating injuries too. They had been married for exactly 25 years to the day, and now they had died exactly 9 days apart from each other as martyrs. The Moore bombings shocked the entire nation and the world. Protests were registered at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. Jackie Robinson led a memorial service in New York for the Moores. 3,000 mourners came to pay their respects to the fallen heroes. On March 6, 1952, 15,000 people filled Madison Square Garden for an NAACP memorial service for the Moores now. The great poet Langston Hughes wrote a poem called The Ballad of Harry Moore. He read it out loud to the massive crowd that historic night. Florida means land of flowers. It was on a Christmas night. In the state named for the flowers, men came bearing dynamite to kill them. No bomb can kill the dreams I hold, for freedom never dies. Those were the words that Langston Hughes wrote to honor Harry Moore's memory. The FBI launched a massive investigation into the bombing immediately. They were convinced the Ku Klux Klan was responsible for the murders. They identified several suspects in the case, but they could never prove it in court. No one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. 5 separate investigations were conducted over 50 years: 1951, 78, 91, 2004, 2008. In 1978, a dying Klansman named Edward Spivey called the sheriff's office. He wanted to finally clear his guilty conscience. He named names on his deathbed. 4 Klan members, he said, were responsible: Joseph Cox, Earl Brooklyn, Tillman Belvin, and himself as well. In 2006, Florida officials identified all 4 men as the most likely bombers, but all 4 of them were long dead by then. 5 separate investigations conducted over 5 decades. 0 prosecutions, 0 convictions, 0 justice. This happened in America then. So why don't we know Harry Moore's name the way we know Rosa Parks, the way we know Martin Luther King Jr.? Why was he simply forgotten? Moore was killed 3 years before Brown versus Board of Education in '54, before historians say the civil rights movement began. He was a grassroots organizer, not a charismatic speaker. He worked in rural Florida, not in major cities where the national press was. And his murder was never solved. No dramatic trial, no conviction, no closure, no catharsis. Just decades and decades of silence and pain. Ben Green, his biographer, said it best about Moore. Harry Moore had the audacity to do this work before anybody was even paying attention. Today, there is a memorial park in Mims, Florida. A replica of the Moore's home now stands where the original house was destroyed by hate. In 2019, the Groveland Four were finally pardoned. In 2021, their case was officially dismissed at last. In 2022, Brevard County School Board reinstated Harry and Harriette as teachers, 76 years after they were wrongly fired. Freedom never descends upon a people. It is always bought with a price. Harry Moore paid that price on Christmas night for the right to vote,